Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guests are two members of Northeast Kingdom Human Services, Lila Bennett and Blaine LaChance. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
And you are no stranger here, Lila.
No, I believe this is my third time with you.
Yeah,
here.
I think it's third, and you're certainly welcome to come on again. And how did Lila convince you to come on today?
Just a brief text message, and I jumped at the opportunity. So I haven't had the chance, and this is my first time, so I was excited to be here.
Right. So World Mental Health Day is coming up. What does that mean for your agency?
Well, it's an opportunity for us to spread awareness about the importance of taking care of your mental health. It's also an opportunity for us to break down the stigma around it, especially up here in the Northeast Kingdom, where we're quite a prideful bunch, and maybe asking for help is a little bit difficult. And so it's a way for us to say, hey, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to take care of your brain just like you take care of any other part of your body. Like Blaine was talking about, people dial 911 all the time, but
they rarely take the opportunity, or most people don't know how it all works when somebody's concerned about somebody with a mental health emergency. Right. And so I think the intent of this Mental Health Awareness Day is to take a moment, actually take 40 seconds is the theme of it, to reach out to somebody or to have that conversation, and not necessarily kind of stay stuck in that culture of pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Right. It's okay to be vulnerable and reach out to somebody you trust.
All right, Lila, your title is?
I am Director of Marketing, Development, and Community Relations at Northeast Kingdom Human Services.
And yours, Blaine, is?
Director of Adult Mental Health Services.
Right. I will say I've dealt with Lila a lot, and she has really helped put Northeast Kingdom Human Services on the map. And you might think, well, but they've been around for decades. But I think you're the first real marketing person.
Yes, it has never. It's never been a position before. It's new. Our CEO saw the importance of needing to tell the story, and so that's my job, and that's what I do.
Right.
It's tricky because I think Lila's role is very important to us, because I think, like she mentioned, our president and CEO kind of saw that it's a careful balance, because the work we do is private, right? We don't want to share people's personal struggles, but at the same time, when we find success or ways to help people, we kind of want to shout that from the top of a mountain. So it's a kind of like a balancing act, and Lila's been hugely beneficial with that.
Yeah, I think in the old days, and I mean old days, I mean like up until recent years, if you had an issue or a family member had an issue, it was kind of kept quiet. And if you were seeing a counselor, you might not want to even be telling your friends. I think that's beginning to change.
That's certainly what our hope is. I think that we're still rural, and I think there's still some of these cultural components, but I think the more messaging that we can do, the more that we can connect, the more that we can have these conversations to normalize them, the better off that one extra person is going to be, and that makes a huge difference to us.
So we've come a long ways, but we have a long more ways to come. But I think the work you're doing, your agency, I think is starting to bear some fruit.
Yeah, and what's happening? Mental Health Awareness Day is October 10th. And the theme this year across the nation is take 40 seconds. Right. Because 40 seconds isn't very long. Right. But you can do a lot in 40 seconds. You can call and check on someone and see how they're doing. You can send a text message. You could call the emergency number for someone who needed help. 40 seconds is no time, but it's all the time in the world.
I think sometimes it's actually, in some ways, it's getting easier to live, to be able to get help. But I think in this day and age, I think sometimes if you stay glued to your TV, if you watch the news 24/7, is, that's enough to, that's enough for any of us to just,
Get
I don't know.
discouraged.
I think the news cycle plays a huge role, whether you have, because I know I try not to watch the news anymore. I mean, I don't mean that politically. I just mean the news. We're being saturated with it, and the news focuses on all bad. So I think sometimes, besides needing to get help, I think sometimes we need to escape from this technological world.
Yeah, I do think that sometimes the technological world is isolating.
Yeah.
Social media was created to make connection, but
Right.
it actually kind of puts us in our little boxes, and maybe we hide behind our screens or our perfect filtered photographs, and then we're all trying to live up to this ideal that doesn't really exist, and it can be very discouraging. And so that's why programs like our adult mental health program is so important, because it has Blaine can talk more
Right.
about it, but it's there to connect people and give them the steps.
Right. What does your program do?
So my role oversees several different programs, but one that I'd like to mention is our CRT program. And so that program is dedicated to folks who have a severe and persistent mental illness, and so multiple different parts of their life they may need some help in, right? And that may be some pointers, right? Like, hey, every time you watch the news, which you're doing a lot of, right, it's very upsetting to you. And so talking to an individual person about what impacts them. Some folks, it may be rewarding to watch the news that much. They may really love it and get some gratification out of it. But for others, it may be very stressful, right? And so that's the whole idea of each of these programs, is to meet somebody and individualize the plan to them, understand what impacts them individually, and make a plan moving forward. But the most important part, kind of tapping into what Lila was saying, is really just having that conversation and keeping it open. There's no shame about what makes you tick or what you're struggling with, in the same way that we shouldn't judge somebody with asthma or a knee problem, and so that's kind of how we manage our programs and focus on wellness.
Right, and I think, Lila, you once mentioned on the show there's a difference of
Mental health versus mental illness.
Right, and what's the difference?
Well, mental illness is like what Blaine was just talking about, a severe and persistent issue that's affecting your everyday life. And our CRT program, CRT stands for Community Rehabilitation Treatment, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And so people who are struggling with schizophrenia or bipolar, or what are some other...
So major depressive disorder or personality disorders can be quite severe at times as well.
So those would be like mental illnesses that our team can help you with your pointers and help you with your life to have the boundaries to not watch the news all day if that's your trigger, all of those things. But mental health is more like we all go through highs and lows and ups and downs and struggles in life. And mental health is about awareness and mindfulness and understanding that it's okay to not be okay and to reach out for help when you might be struggling, to keep you more in the middle. It's when you don't take care of your mental health and issues compound that you can become severely depressed, say, and then kind of go into needing more extreme help.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, I think there's also a little bit of a paradigm shift. We used to think of illness as, like we're looking at the picture with what's wrong, right? So the shift is what's right. What a concept. How do we build on the things that are going well in your life? And so all of the different approaches to certain conditions that are coming out have really flipped the triangle, right? And so we're trying to build off the things that are working in your life rather than viewing you as somebody with a condition. Right. And so the idea of health versus illness is kind of very broad in that way as well. And we are firm believers at NKHS about that wellness and flipping that triangle.
Right.
So
now, where does post-traumatic stress, does that fall within your realm, like of the combat veterans?
Absolutely, and I think, I'm glad that you asked that question. I think in the mainstream media, PTSD is, I think, for most of us, the first response is those on the front lines, right? Combat veterans. But the reality is that trauma exists in multiple ways, shapes, and forms. And, person A may get into a car accident and be perfectly fine. Person B may get in that same accident and never recover.
Right.
And so post-traumatic stress disorder is really the reaction in our brains about something that we can't handle, right? Our brain can't handle it, our emotions can't handle it, and we need help to get through it.
Right.
And so the short answer is yes. I think almost everybody we serve has an element of trauma in their life. It may not rise to the clinical level of PTSD, but it's certainly something that we are informed about, and we try to be informed no matter what the approach is.
Right.
With regard to somebody's trauma history.
Because the reason I ask is I have a couple people who've been on here, including one, an older gentleman who must be near 80, and he's like the Pied Piper of PTSD, and he wouldn't mind me saying his name because he's been on here, Winston Carbonneau of Derby. I think he's done so good for the veterans of the area because he's a veteran of the Korean War, platoon 2 tours of combat, including the Purple Heart in Vietnam, career military man who came back, worked for the Newport Police Department. Then his PTSD really kicked into full gear, and he was saying the old school with combat veterans like World War II and Korea and to a degree Vietnam was you don't talk about those things. You keep it in. And he's been on my show throughout the years. I mean, the last 20 years he's been involved with me, and he says after he started going to a counselor, he says that was because he realized, he says, he used to say I'm nuts because he'll tell you I struggle with it, but he says it's okay though because that's who I am. And he started going to a counselor, and he said it totally changed his life, and that's how come he comes on my show to especially during these days of especially a few years ago when we were in full-fledged war. So
that's incredible.
Yeah, then I have another, she's a young lady, she's been on the show, and she talks about struggling with PTSD from the current wars. She was, as she says, my paperwork might show that I weren't in combat, but I was, as an MP, she said, well, you sure feel like you're in combat when you're being shot at. And so, and she talks about struggling to find your place back in this world. So
well, and that leads me to thinking about our community here, where we have PTSD among people who also aren't veterans.
Right.
That you can develop PTSD from your childhood, from domestic violence, from a bad marriage. That all of those things can contribute to developing PTSD or just trauma. And so Blaine can probably talk about this more, but we also offer trauma-informed care where we take into consideration every single person's history, what they've faced, what got them to where they are today, and how can we use that information to help them build their life. And that is also what we're doing with our youth. Especially, we have a new program called 7 Challenges, and that is to access teens who are using drugs and alcohol to take care of their pain, and to look at, like, why are you doing that? Is it because you have some trauma from your childhood that you don't know what to do with, and you're trying to deal with these feelings in that way? And so trauma is something that is very prevalent here, and especially because life is hard, and a lot of people, most of us, are struggling to make our ends meet, and winter is long and cold, and heating bills and frozen pipes, and there's so much struggle, and struggle does kind of create trauma in and of itself.
Especially it depends on how you internalize it, and But you were saying about the trauma, like, it wasn't too many years ago, and I'm sure it still goes on. Is the family secrets. The family secrets. We will take care of it within the family.
Don't talk about
Yeah,
it.
don't talk about it. We will deal with it. And I think, that's probably true everywhere, but, we are a little slower on the draw on a lot of things here.
I think the tragedy of that, you're absolutely right, because the culture used to be pick yourself up by your bootstraps, your problems are your own, right, or your family's and not to be shared. And that made sense, right, based on the cultural values at the time. But fast forward to 2019, where these problems get bigger and more unmanageable, and the net result of that is these families, right, they're matriarchs, they're patriarchs, they pass away, and then there's nobody left to support that person, and all of a sudden they're thrust into the community and expected to figure it all out, and it's very overwhelming between all the state systems that are set up with all the forms you need to fill out. So that's really where our program is experiencing a lot of influx of families, aging out of the ability to care for that loved one, and us trying to step in, and that generates a lot of anxiety and trauma in and of itself. Their whole world shifts very quickly. So. Right.
You were saying about aging out. It's and this is probably a little out of your realm, but every once in a while, we all hear people say, "Well, I wouldn't ever have my parent go in a nursing home." Well, let's look at that though. Is right now I've been interviewing a 97-year-old woman, and pretty soon she's going to celebrate one of her children turning 80.
Wow.
And so, in other words, is they're both what some people would term elderly, even though my thoughts on elderly, I think the term elderly to me is a frame of just a word, because I know 90-year-old people who are not elderly acting, but I know 60-year-olds who act elderly. And so I just wanted to put that in when you were talking about aging out and that.
It's absolutely a Western concept,
right?
To be elderly, yeah.
Right. So, because the one thing you were talking about, the families in this area, for good or bad, and sometimes a lot of times good, but a lot of times bad, you have very strong family connections. You have, and mom and dad, and then that generation starts slipping away, and you are out there. Even the most functional people, it's a struggle because there's generation. In this area, generations have lived here, and
sometimes generations of trauma.
Right.
It's just passed down. It's the way it is, and trying to open up the concept that there's a new way, that there is a new way of doing things, that you don't have to be alone, that you don't have to be ashamed, that you can ask for help, that you can get help, that you can do things differently. Even starting that conversation is a little bit difficult, but I do think that we're getting somewhere. I think that, the families that we're working with, I think when people see the results, like when your child goes to school and starts to be able to make the connections with their friends and be able to stay in the classroom, those little things make a big difference in terms of like the overall generational trauma, that you can take one thing and change it. And that's kind of what we do at NKHS, we try to take one thing and make it better.
What's interesting?
Right?
Yeah, we build on the successes that exist in folks' lives, which is more powerful than one might expect, because again, we used to focus on what's wrong.
Right. Well, before the show, I was telling you, I provided a tour for a group of folks of the global campus, which is people, lifelong learners with various educational, with various ways of learning. And there were people there that I know most people would not understand. They might have their difficulties in one area, but I was utterly astonished by their capabilities.
Yes.
Yes, they have some challenges over here, but their capability, I can think of like 3 of them that was like, holy smokes, you're brilliant. Because, and I don't think a lot of people would have, been using the word brilliant if you looked at the challenges.
One of my favorite quotes of all time, and I'm probably going to mess it up, but it's an Albert Einstein
Right.
quote, and it's, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it'll go its whole life thinking it's a fool, right? When in fact, it's the master of its own domain, and we really need to be looking at things through the right lens, not just a generic thing and judging everybody wholesale. So it's really
Absolutely.
about meeting them, understanding that individual like Lila was talking about, and building on their strengths.
Now, how long have you been in your job?
I've been at Northeast Kingdom for about 2 years, and in my current role for about 1.5 years.
Right.
But I've been in the field for about 10 years.
Right. Now, you see, this is the first time we're meeting, and it sounds like you really love your job.
I do. I care a lot about, I think, what's needed, and I see the payoff, the effort that these folks who engage in our services and the teams that work with them can achieve. And I get emotional throughout the week, every week, based on the positivity that can come through this work. But it's seldom seen, so I think this is why we jump at the opportunity to be able to have these conversations in forums like this.
And sometimes we think of helping people. We think it has to be a grand thing. And I mean, even if it's just somebody struggling, sometimes it only takes words. If somebody's just struggling to get through a day, and I'll say something we did, and my wife and I actually, we do a lot, but we do it quietly. But one day, we kept seeing this person in the store, and we knew she'd made some tough decisions in her life, but she was working hard, and but then we knew she had experienced a death, and we just slipped her a nominal amount of money and said, go do something for yourself. And to this day, she's now a manager. She has built herself up. She still has her, and she said it was the first time anybody had just taken the time to say, take care of yourself. And she said it made all the difference in the world. And I'm not saying you even have to do money.
Mm-hmm.
Just sometimes it's like I'm the Pied Piper. Like when I write history, I often go to people who have never told their stories before,
Right.
and and sometimes I even get flack for it, and it's the badge of honor for me, because a lot of the important people, they want me to write about them. They don't want me to write about them. Well, no, those people have really good stories to tell, and their stories is as valid or more valid than those quote important people, many who are only important in their own minds.
And go ahead.
I was going to say, and what we're finding is the more people you get to share those stories, you get to hear from, the more you find that those stories are shared.
Yes.
Right? And that's what gets us to normalizing and taking the stigma away.
Yep. Yeah, and it's really about anything, even if it's, in my world, what I'm doing is a lot of times when we just look at old people, we just look at them as old.
We don't see them.
You don't see
Yes.
them storming the beaches of Normandy.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see them, and I think it just in the Asian world. In the Asian world, it has my writing and the writings of people like me have actually put a face to the Asian population, showed, hey, these people really are not much different than us. And I compare what you're doing, both of you are doing.
I think it is a lot about hope too. When you can see someone for who they are, it gives them hope. So like we, Northeast Kingdom Human Services, we have programs that support people in their mental illness and mental health, but we also have a large program that supports people with developmental disabilities. And some of those people can't speak. need someone to help them type on a keyboard to get their words across, but they have brilliant minds that are filled with incredible stories and poems and all kinds of things. Like, everybody has a key to brilliance, and it's about looking and seeing people as people and not judging them for what they aren't, but looking for who they are. And I also think that kind of brings us to, again, like, the Mental Health Awareness Day is focused on these 40 seconds of hoping and helping, because suicide rates are on the rise. And so, like, we're trying as a community of mental health workers to spread the message of hope, of, that there's people here, that every single person's voice matters, and that we understand how hard it is.
Okay, we only have a couple more minutes.
Yeah, I just thought it might be helpful to share as well. So the theme of Mental Health Awareness Day, there's every 40 seconds worldwide, the statistic is that somebody completes suicide.
Yeah.
And so that's where the theme of let's take 40 seconds to try and combat that, to try and counter that. And one thing that I just want to share with anybody that's watching this that needs to reach out, you don't need to necessarily reach out to somebody with letters at the end of their name. Mm-hmm. You don't need to reach out to us as an agency necessarily, but reach out to somebody that you love, reach out to somebody that you trust. If you don't have somebody like that, if they're too far away, if they're busy with their own lives, whatever the case may be, we can be there for you. And the important part is to take that 40 seconds and start that conversation for yourself and make sure that you're reaching out to somebody to maintain connections.
So, so before we leave, if somebody watching or listening to this show thinks they need help,
Yes.
what can they do?
So they can do a couple different things. If they want to call Northeast Kingdom Human Services, they can call 24/7 any day of the week at 802-334-6744, and there will always be someone there to answer the phone. If they would like to call text, they won't be texting NKHS, but they'll be texting the Vermont Crisis Text Line, and that's 741-741. If you just want some support and some information, you can go to our website at NKHS.org. And there's a lot of information on there. You can just, sometimes I think if people can just go and read about some struggles, read some stories, it's enough to kind of provide some hope and get them through until they can get to a person,
Right.
at the next available time. So our website, or give us a call.
Right. Okay, thank you both for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.